This is a quick video I'm putting together for my students to help them prepare for a Kahoot quiz at our next lesson. If this is a subject that interests you, I will, having got student feedback, create a more professional video in the future. So I'm going to talk about tips and tricks for note-taking in lessons. Students have spent about 6 hours a day in lessons. These are very valuable time where teachers are available to explain and answer questions. I fear a lot of students don't use these lessons wisely, and a lot of the reason why is they struggle to take notes. So I'm going to start by taking a step back and looking at the objective of attending lessons at school. And we want students to learn new information. They're an opportunity to ask the teacher questions, and we want them to try to remember what was taught. Now, I know when I teach teenagers, very often it looks like their objective is to get through the class doing as little as possible. But this is not taking advantage of the teacher's knowledge and ability to teach. And if you don't learn in the lesson, then you've got to read on your own and try to figure these things out, which is much more difficult. So if students take notes in class, they're 7 times more likely to remember the lesson. So we want students to take notes, but taking notes in class is cognitively very, very difficult because it requires students to learn new information at the same time as writing down what they've been taught. Doing so is hard for everybody, but for students with learning differences, it's even more difficult. So taking notes in class is hard, but they're needed for completing homework and for doing any revision. And it's harder for those with these sort of issues: attention, handwriting, processing speed, working memory. So there are lots of students that struggle to take good notes in class, but if they have poor notes, it's really hard for them to get good grades right across the curriculum. Here are some typical problems with class notes. At times they are incorrect. Even though the student was trying to write exactly what the teacher said, sometimes because of the time lag, they wrote down incorrect information. They're incomplete because the student just couldn't write everything that the teacher said. At times they're illegible because handwriting isn't the student's strength, but also they were just trying to write really, really quickly. There's poor spelling, so if you've got poor spelling in notes, chances are you're going to copy that into homework or into revision notes. So in taking these notes, this student has probably been distracted from learning what the teacher was saying rather than really concentrating on what the teacher was saying. So how can teachers help? And what I've done here is I've just quickly listed some strategies that teachers can put into place to help students take better notes in class. And the first is supply hard copy notes. And here is an example of my son's hard copy notes that I managed to fish out of his school bag. They are not dated, they're not in any order. They were so disorganized that it would have taken us longer to figure out how to use them than just start from scratch. So I do think hard copy handouts can be really helpful, but if students are disorganized, then they're not the solution. And I do recommend that all my students date and file every handout that they get to treat them as a precious commodity that teachers have put time into creating. They are needed, they are necessary, they will be helpful, so don't just stuff them in the bottom of your bag. If students struggle with reading, they're still required to read these hard copy notes, and some students avoid reading at all costs, and even though these might be the most helpful handouts in the world, they're never going to look at them, which is why they throw them into the bottom of their bags. What's the difference between a worksheet and hard copy notes? Well, I would make the distinction that a worksheet probably needs the student to add information. So they need to use the information that they're gaining in the lesson to complete the worksheet. And there is a lovely free app that if a student has a smartphone or a tablet, they can take a photograph of any worksheet that the teacher supplies, and they can have that read aloud, so they're not relying on their reading skills. And if they want, they can then convert it to a Word document, and once they have a Word document, they can either type their answers or they can dictate answers, and then they can either email that back to the teacher or print it out. The next option available to teachers, which I favour more than any other, is for teachers to supply electronic notes rather than hard copy notes. And if teachers are using PowerPoints in lessons, they already have these available. But if not, they could quickly create some in Word, which they could then put in some sort of shared area where students can download or email them out. And here is an example of teacher supplied electronic notes that cover the exact same topics that we saw the student making notes on earlier. Ideally, teachers could provide a scaffold, not complete notes, that students might need to complete during the class, like fill in the missing word to make sure students engage in the lesson. But it's also good to have a complete set of notes just in case students made mistakes when they completed their own notes. By providing these, teachers enable students to stop worrying about taking notes and listen and learn during the lesson, which I think is a far better use of time, far better than copying information down from the board. But the great news is, once students have electronic class notes, they can have them read aloud and they can cut and paste this information into their homework. And I'm going to show you how we can do this. Here is an example of some teacher supplied electronic notes, and I'm reading them within Microsoft Word, but the functionality I'm going to show you, you can get to work no matter how you're reading it. But because I'm in Word, I'm just going to place my cursor where I want the notes to be read from, and then I click here to say read aloud. Once I do that, this toolbar opens up, and I can
language
press
device, symbolism. What is symbolism? When an object or
and if I find that's too quick, I can slower it down, or I can change the voice.
Represents something else, usually an idea or quality. Example: Eva Smith and Edna the parlourmaid stand for those who have little or no power over their own life.
This enables students who are poor readers not to be held back by their reading speed. Exactly how do students have text read aloud? Well, that depends very much on the device that's being used, but the functionality is called text-to-speech, and you can switch it on any device, and it is completely free. And I have a playlist of all the options that are available to you, and I'll put this link in the details below so you can go and find out how to do it in Word Online, on a Mac, in Office 365, in Microsoft Edge, on an iPad. So it's very simple to do, but how you do it depends on the device that you are reading it on. What can you do if teachers do not supply electronic notes? Well, I would suggest you just request them. Many teachers don't realise how inaccessible their lessons can be for students with learning differences. But I found when I requested them, a lot of teachers were able to supply me with notes straight away. Not all teachers, some have everything written down and they don't have electronic copies of everything, in which case I would say then go for textbooks. But you will have teachers that have this information available already, and sometimes this request is better coming from a parent. I wouldn't necessarily rely on students to request electronic notes from a teacher. So now let's just look at textbooks. Basically, if a student has a textbook, it removes the pressure from having to capture everything that is said during the lesson. It frees students up to listen and learn. Now, budgets often stop schools buying textbooks, so it's really worth buying your own, and teacher recommendations are definitely worthwhile because the teacher will know the best book that covers the syllabus. It's worth knowing that the order that subjects are taught can differ from the classroom to the textbook, so it's helpful for students to know in advance what is being taught. And if they do, they If they read through the textbook before the class or have it read to them using Read Aloud, it could really help students understand the lesson better. And if they don't want to do this, I would recommend watching videos that explain the class beforehand, as this will help students better engage in the lesson and make the most of the lesson. There are disadvantages as well of textbooks. I know for myself as a parent, I was very quick to buy textbooks for my children, but they didn't read them. They ended up just being very expensive bag weights that they took back and forth to school, but they were in perfect condition at the end of the course. And that brings me to electronic textbooks, which I think are absolutely brilliant. And what I'm going to show you are free electronic textbooks that any school can get from Rnib Bookshare. I'm not going to go into lots of detail now, but I'm just going to show you what's possible with Rnib Bookshare. Before I show you electronic textbooks, I just want to say quickly that they have all the benefits of the physical book, plus students can print out pages and take them into class, which is a workaround if teachers cannot provide electronic notes for them. And they can have these books read aloud to them. They can change the fonts or the background colours to be dyslexia friendly, and they can cut and paste information from these electronic textbooks into homework or into revision notes in a very similar way that you could when teachers supplied electronic textbooks, say in Word or PowerPoint. But one of the things that I teach my students that is extremely important, that if you have electronic notes or you have an electronic textbook and you cut and paste information into homework, it is extremely important that you do not plagiarize. You make that information your own. It's always easier to start your work without a blank piece of paper, but with notes there that make sense and are correct. But you have to understand them and you have to make them your own. You cannot just cut and paste something, print it off and hand it in. Any teacher will know that you've done this and will pull you up on it. I'm just going to give you the quickest introduction to Rnib Bookshare. So here it is, Rnib Bookshare. I'm accessing it over the internet. Through Rnib, I can also get PDF versions of a book. So here we see exactly the same book but in a PDF version. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to show you the web reader in Rnib Bookshare. So this is exactly the same text that is in the physical hard copy book, but because it's here, I am able to have it read aloud by pressing this.
Language device, image.
And what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to go into the settings and show you what you can change. So we can have the background changed, we can have it as open dyslexic font, we can change the font size if we want, we can make the voice slower or faster, and we can change the voice. So I'll save those and you'll see how it changes. Or I could show you some of the different options. And now I'm going to press play, which is basically asking it to read aloud.
Language device, image. The most important metaphor Priestley creates is fire and blood and anguish. P56. Spoken by the inspector in his final speech and repeated by Sheila, P.
We saw how it highlighted the whole sentence and then highlighted each word. That's very impressive, immersive reading, which draws the student eye into the text. And while they can still just listen without engaging with the text, they're far more likely to read because of this way that the words are highlighted. So in conclusion, this is just a quick comparison. Here we have the handwritten notes in class. They are incorrect, incomplete, illegible, and have poor spelling. And if this is the basis for homework and revision, the student is not set up for success. But if you have the textbook or the electronic textbook or teacher supplied notes, these are legible, they are correct, they are complete, they are reliable. And if you have the electronic format, they can be read aloud and they can be made visually easier to read for dyslexics. if students have good quality notes, they are able to go on and create good quality homework and get better results in exams. As you can see, there is one more option I've listed, but I would only use more advanced note-taking technology if I was unable to have good electronic notes provided or an electronic textbook, because these involve a lot more expense and are probably more suitable as students get older, and I have a lot of younger students on my courses, so they're not ideal for younger students. But I have already created a video that describes the Echo pen, which I personally wouldn't be without, but you just need to watch that video because it's so different to any other smart pen you could possibly think of. It's using very old technology, but I think it's excellent. And I have a playlist that I need to add more videos to, all on technology to improve note-taking. So I really hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'd be very interested to know in the comments which technology that I've described do you think will be the most helpful for you. Thanks for watching.